Alrighty, so here we are. Or that Trump's policies are bad for America. So I only have 3 minutes to sort of start off with my opening statement, so I'll try to get through everything pretty quick because there's a lot to cover here. Firstly, I'll just get it off the ground. I think that there are exactly 2 things that the Trump administration has done that is worth commendation. The first is his access to TPP. I think that was an awful piece of legislation, and that he completely followed his mandate to do that. And second thing would be his ability to seem to want to negotiate with Russia and sort of de-escalate there. So those are the 2 things that he will get credit for. I think literally every other piece of policy he has ever implemented is just terrible for Americans. All right, so firstly, on just talking about money and politics, corruption, and those sort of things. So I think that this was the biggest issue that was coming out of the campaign season. It's the one that he can arguably claim the most mandate for. This whole rhetoric about draining the swamp and trying to tackle the establishment was something that a lot of people voted in for, and something that he has utterly backflipped on and gone completely in the other direction. So he's appointed millionaire Betsy DeVos for Secretary of Education, someone who doesn't believe in the public education system and wants to scrap public schools. He appointed Steve Mnuchin, an ex-Goldman Sachs employee, as the Secretary of Treasury. He appointed Rex Tillerson, the CEO of ExxonMobil, as Secretary of State, ExxonMobil being a company that he has personal investments in. So this is the clearest example of corruption that you've ever seen in the world, and is likely to lead to very bad policies for average Americans, which we can already see, right? So one of his executive orders is that he scrapped an Obama administration law that held financial advisors accountable if they weren't looking out for their client's best interest. And this was something that was saving people, that people were losing $17 billion a year across the entirety of the American financial system. And that's just completely scrapped. So we're going to go back to a system where financial advisors can just take average people's money, spend it however they want, and lose them tons of money in the process. The second thing that he did in regards to these sort of things is take these huge axes to the piece of legislation known as Dodd-Frank, which Sean Spicer called disastrous, and some regulations that were put in place there about rules that, you know, protected customers from banks speculating with their funds, about predatory payday loans targeting that. All of that has been targeted and repealed. So these are specific laws that have been put in place to try to end the kind of predatory relationship that exists between investment banks and Wall Street and average Americans. And Trump is just completely taking a axe to all of that. So all of his rhetoric about, I'm going to protect the American people, I'm going to take on these large financial institutions, is obviously completely bullshit, and is going to, in fact, just continue to side with the large banks. That's all that I have time for in a moment. I have some more stuff we'll get to later, but first I'll just pass it over and let you respond to that.
Well, you seem to believe, as many, actually, I don't know what your politics are, but clearly you're not a conservative, I don't think. You seem to make the same mistake that many such people make, which is assuming that anyone who is rich, anyone who's rich is automatically part of the establishment. Frankly, I don't think you people have any idea what he's talking about when he says the establishment, when he's talking about the deep state or the wicked, evil, literally satanic people that infiltrated both the highest levels of the Democrat and Republican Party, against whom he ran, and against whom he is very much fulfilling his promises in terms of what I've been hearing about what's going on in the background with Jeff Sessions, the people that are going to be gone after soon. I know that people like to think that anyone who's richer than them is evil and part of the 1%, part of the elite. It's frankly not the case. I also want to say, real quick, free my nigga Tay. She was the victim of anti-artificial intelligence, institutional racism, and that's a serious problem I think we're going to have to deal with as America moves forward. But that said, I do have a couple questions for you. My first one is this. Was America going in a good or bad direction before this election?
Alrighty. Okay, so specifically answering, so was America going in a good or bad direction before this election? I would say that the kinds of neoliberal policies that was pursued under the Obama administration, in so far as it exacerbated corporatism and the ability for large institutions and large businesses to continue to make profit and grow the wealth inequality that exists in America, that was heading in a negative direction. I would say that the kind of social policies that were being implemented in regards to healthcare, in regards to things like marriage equality, that overall existed in a positive direction. So I think that the Obama administration, I also think that the kinds of interventionist policies, specifically in regards to things like the drone campaign and stuff, was overall negative and something that needed to be scaled back. But so I mean, just kind of generalizing and saying it's heading in one way or another is a little bit difficult because obviously there exist a lot of different issues. I think that it was good on some things, and I think it was heading in the wrong direction on those other sort of things. So specifically, just to address this idea of like, these leftist people who think that everyone who is richer than them is automatically evil. Like, this isn't an unfounded claim, right? Like, the Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, right? While he was in Goldman Sachs, Steve Mnuchin is an actual criminal who should be in jail because while he was in Goldman Sachs, fraud was their business model. They would pay rating agencies to rate loans AAA when they were actually super risky, sell them to unsuspecting clients, and then turn around and bet derivatives on those exact same loans. So they knew the loans were going to fail. They knew that they were preying on people to try to get their money and then make money out of it both ways. And they did it anyway. And no one has been prosecuted for that. No one has gone to any jail because the entire system is very favored towards those lobbyists, right? There's also a person who, while he was under control of One West Bank, went on a foreclosure spree, foreclosing on huge people's houses, including an 82-year-old woman who had an outstanding debt of 72 cents, right? So it's not like, oh, these people are rich and then they're evil. They're evil because they make awful decisions that prioritize their gaining of profit for them and their corporate friends over the interests of the American people. And I would love to hear your response that would justify that, all of this is okay. Specifically, and this kind of weird sort of trolley thing that you're saying about like, he's tackling like, these Satanism exists and things there. I think that the people who were in the Rust Belt, that like the Democratic firewall that lost Clinton the election, subsequently went for Trump, when they were talking about their factory jobs that they had lost, when they were talking about their struggling economic conditions, they weren't concerned with this weird Satanism thing that you're talking about. They actually don't even know exactly to what you're referring. I think that they were more concerned about the exact thing that I'm talking about the predatory practices of Wall Street, about trade institutions like the TPP that was looking to ship jobs overseas.
All right, so two things. First of all, I asked you a minute ago about whether America was heading in a good or bad direction. And at that time, you were able to recognize nuance and say it was too blanket of a statement. And yet the very title of this debate, Trump's policies are bad for America. It seems like you're very selective about when you are making blanket statements, black and white statements, and when you can recognize nuance, which is interesting. As far as what you said about Steve Mnuchin, you didn't answer the question at all. I asked you, I asserted rather that you seem to believe anyone richer than you is evil. And instead of even remotely approaching that topic, you picked one particular individual and his actions and then went on an irrelevant tirade about him. Now, I'll admit I don't know a lot about Steve Mnuchin. You might be right about things you said. That's still not relevant to the point I was making, which is that a lot of people tend to see someone with more money than them and they assume they must be evil. Now, there are certainly evil people with lots of money. There are just as many evil people with no money. And there are just as many people with money who are not evil. So you didn't really address that at all. Secondly, you said all of Trump's policies are bad for America except the ones you mentioned. So my question to you is, how is putting a temporary halt on travel from terror-prone countries bad for America?
All right, fantastic. I'm glad we got onto the immigration because that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about. So the immigration policy is bad for a number of reasons. The first one is that it is completely ineffective, right? So if you actually look at the statistics of the number of attacks that have been perpetrated by immigrants from those nations, there are 0 attacks that have from people that have been targeted by this immigration ban. The people that have come, sure, you can give me examples afterwards, but I would say that I haven't certainly heard of any of them. And if they do exist, they probably is in a very small number. If you want to statistically target a group that you, in order to try to reel back some sort of safety concerns, I would suggest that statistically speaking, white men in America are probably the group that you'll want to target. So this idea of like attacking things with a broad blanket statement is something that is largely ineffective. The second way that it also is problematic is that if you actually wanted to target people from the Middle East and from this region that pose threats to America, the kinds of countries that people are missing from the travel ban are places like Saudi Arabia. 15 of 19 of the 9/11 hijackers exist in Saudi Arabia. There exist companies that openly support terrorist groups and openly have anti-American sentiment that exist in Saudi Arabia. Curiously missing from that travel ban. If it was the case they were trying to stop people from coming to America who were going to do harm, that seems like a pretty clear instance where we would want to target. But of course, it's not doing that. Does it have something to do with the fact that Trump has, huge investments in Saudi Arabia, has 7 businesses and sold $50 million worth of apartments? I'm going to guess that it exists so. But specifically, I want to make the case of why this actually makes things less safe for America, right? Is because we know that ISIS's recruiting policy is a very specific tactic, right? The way that ISIS manages to recruit people is that it promotes this narrative of that the West is against you, that America is against you, America is targeting you because of your faith, that this is a war that we did not start, but we have to fight for our survival. And if you want to survive, you need to come over to us. What better piece of policy to be able to prove ISIS's own point for them than a blanket ban that everyone is calling a Muslim ban, because it is, you know, like Trump on the campaign trail said, I'm going to institute a Muslim ban. Rudy Giuliani, when he was approached about this immigration ban, said Trump wants to do a Muslim ban. We just got to figure out a way to call it something different. What better way to prove ISIS's point and to give them a huge amount of credibility when promoting that narrative than to implement this policy? In addition to that, the recent military attack that Trump led, that it was in the Middle East, killed 30 civilians, including an 8-year-old girl. The actions of Trump in the Middle East are further enabling groups like ISIS to recruit and to further radicalize. And that specifically is why it is making bad for America, because it is making America's enemies much, much easier to draw support by legitimizing their actions.
You know that these 7 countries that immigration is temporarily halted from, you know he's just enforcing a policy that Obama created, right?
So that, in fact, is not true. So the countries that have been targeted were drawn out under the Obama administration. The Obama administration never proposed anything as broad as banning every people from those countries. Specifically, I think the only one that it was banned from was Iran in response to a very significant, very particular incident. And even in those cases, I think it was only under a much stricter vetting policy, not actually a blanket ban.
Okay, you realize that's exactly what this is, right? You refer to this as a Muslim ban, which is, of course, completely retarded and untrue, and a nice narrative that BuzzFeed and the CIA front Washington Post like to promote. Of course, there are more than 40 Muslim majority countries that are not affected at all by this. Secondly, you clearly have no idea what Islam is. You've clearly never read the Quran. You don't understand what you're talking about. I watched one of your other debates and you seemed more well-read and intelligent. Sadly, that's turning out not to be the case. The West is against Islam. Islam is completely incompatible with all of our values. And I know that they didn't talk about that on Tumblr, but if you actually read the Quran, you learn what the political ideology of Islam is. They are against everything that we stand for. You're talking about countries where women have the same rights as like a coffee table, where if you're gay, they will just throw you off a building. They'll just kill you. And people like you don't understand what's going on. You haven't been paying attention for the last few decades as they've been slowly creeping into the West. When they have a small amount of the population, they pretend to be peaceful. The higher the population goes, the higher the rape goes. Eventually, they start trying to turn everything into Sharia law. They create the no-go zones where even the Western police can't go. There are riots all through Paris now. Sweden now has the highest rate of rape outside of Africa. Guess who's responsible for that? I'll give you a hint. It's not these evil white men that you seem to believe are responsible for everything. Sadly, it doesn't surprise me that you turned out to be one of these self-loathing white people, which is interesting because I'm ethnically Jewish, so a lot of the actual white supremacists don't like me very much. And I'm sure you'll call me one in response to saying that. We have 6% of our population committing more than 50% of the murder, more than the remaining 94% put together. It's not white people. That's just a stupid leftist narrative that was created in the Frankfurt School of Cultural Marxism that people like you love to parrot and promote, despite its complete detachment from reality. So you were saying that this, when you block people from these countries, that it proves ISIS's point. So my question is, were you this upset when Obama banned people from Iraq?
I would say that the policies under Obama that banned people from Iraq perhaps also weren't going in a huge direction. I also, as I alluded to earlier, when you said, is the policies from America going in the right direction? That, you know, I would say that the continued actions of the Obama administration, specifically in regards to drone strikes and things like that, were not good actions that further this narrative. And I would say, in fact, that largely the way that ISIS has been able to grow over the past years were due to the actions of the Obama administration that allowed it further to justify its narrative. The merely thing that I'm pointing out is that Trump is also enabling them to further this narrative as well. And here's the thing, though, right? Because you're saying it's like, oh, you have no idea what Muslim is. You have no idea what the kinds of things that they promote and stand for. Couple of responses to this. Like, firstly, I don't think you really understand what Muslims are about or what Islam is about, because you seem to like indicate this is the classic, like, they want to come here and promote Sharia law. Sharia law is just an institution under Islam that is a personal dictate for the ways that people are supposed to enact their faith. It includes things like how many times a day you're supposed to pray, what kind of religious holidays you're supposed to celebrate. And there is parts of Sharia law in the Islamic text and Quran that specifically states that you should obey the laws of the country in which you occupy. In fact, the leaders of ISIS have just called out several Muslim leaders here in Australia because they have been pointing to specific verses of the Quran that says, respect the laws and customs of the country that you live in, right? So to paint this like entire like blanket brush and be like, oh, of course all of Muslim is evil and stuff. You call like specific examples as point of this, right? Where like women are treated like tables. Once again, that's an institute that's an example of Saudi Arabia, one of the countries that is not on the immigration ban because Trump has huge investments within that country, right? So my point in proving that is that even Trump doesn't believe these kind of things they say. Even Trump doesn't believe that this is a ideology that needs to be protected from the US at all costs, because if he did, he would include Saudi Arabia on this piece of policy, but he doesn't, because he's obviously fine with doing business with these people. He's fine when he's able to make money and do business with these people. But if he actually believed that, they posed a serious threat to the United States, then obviously they would be on this ban as well, right? And what's also very important about considering this Muslim ban is you got to recognize that it's not me, it's not the leftist media that is calling this a Muslim ban. It was Trump during his campaign trail when he said, I'm going to ban all Muslims from the United States. And it's Rudy Giuliani who, on an interview with Fox News, said, Trump called me up and said, I want to do a Muslim ban. How do I do that in a legal sort of way? And then Rudy Giuliani goes on to explain how, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on safety, and we're going to call it a safety ban, not a Muslim ban. But it's entirely clear from that interview, which I'll link to below, that the intentions of it were a Muslim ban.
So first of all, I would have no problem if it were a Muslim ban. I don't think Muslims should be in the West at all. But that's not what Trump did. It's you've avoided the point again, that if this were a Muslim ban, why are countries, 40 plus countries that are Muslim majority, not included? You have no answer for that, of course, like you have no answer for my question about the rich all being evil. And I'm sure you'll distract from that point again. When you say ban, what you people don't seem to understand is that the countries that are destroyed by war, that are hotbeds of terrorism, we're putting into place, follow me carefully here, more strict vetting procedures because there currently are not good ones. And once those are in place, immigration will be allowed from those places again and travel from those places again. Now, I think we should take 0 immigrants from anywhere on the entire planet until we're not $19 trillion in debt anymore and until the threat of terror subsides. Now, that's not what Trump is doing, though. Trump is actually much more of a liberal than people like you seem to realize. He's actually not far enough right for me, not by a long shot. But if it's a Muslim ban, why are more than 40 Muslim majority countries not included?
The reason that more than 40 majority Muslim countries aren't included is because they are not considered part of the Muslim world under the right-wing narrative that has been promoted by both the Trump administration and other people on the right wing for years and years and years, right? So the problem is like, I loved actually when this came up, right? When people in response to this were like, oh, it's not a Muslim ban because why isn't Indonesia on the list? Because that's the exact example that the left has been giving you from years and years and years about this policy of like, oh, we're gonna paint all of Islam with a broad brush. We're gonna say that they fundamentally are opposed to values like liberty and things like that. And we say, well, look at one of these majority Muslim countries that has very progressive civil rights, has relatively few instances of violence or other sort of problems and stuff. They seem to be doing just fine. But then that argument that example goes completely unnoticed. But now all of a sudden, when it's convenient to decide to say, oh, it's not a Muslim ban, then it's like, oh, now we remember about Indonesia again. So I guess I congratulate the right wing on having not as short-term memory as I think they did. The reason why specifically it's these countries and why it's still justified in calling it a Muslim ban is because for years, the right wing has been referring to this particular section of the Middle East as the Muslim world that is characterized by their geopolitical status is characterized by their religion. In fact, you said it yourself when you said that, you know, these Muslim countries are the kinds of countries that treat women like tables, right? Notice that there's nothing to do there with about like the geopolitics of the country or the cultural background of the country or, you know, the kind of power structures that exist in that country, or other reasons why they might, you know, have bad civil rights or all of these other sort of problems. You specifically tied it to Islam. This is the exact narrative that is being pushed by, you know, everyone on the right wing for years and years and years, where they say, this section of countries represents the Muslim world as it stands in the Middle East. We're going to paint them with a broad brush. We're going to say it's the ideology that is causing the problems that exist there, and not, for example, geopolitical instability that is caused by our own administration or further radicalization that is caused by our own administration, but specifically, you know, the actions of this ideology. So, like, to then turn around and then say, oh, but it's not a Muslim ban, is just like completely short-sighted and completely antithetical to everything that people on the right wing have been saying for years and years and years. And once again, this is not me saying that it's a Muslim ban. This is Rudy Giuliani saying Trump called me up and said, I want to do a Muslim ban, right? Specifically, while I have 30 seconds, just addressing your rich is evil point, right? I think I did address it when I talked about the actions of Steve Mnuchin and the actions of Wall Street, and specifically the kinds of legislation that Trump is going to axe, right? Like, my gripe with rich people is not that they're universally evil because they're rich. My gripe with rich people is that the way that they got rich, specifically in regards to institutes like Goldman Sachs and institutes like, you know, like Wall Street, is that they do immoral things. They specifically target vulnerable people to be able to sell predatory loans onto.
Okay, so let's play around in your fairy tale world where a temporary travel restriction from 7 particular countries is actually the same thing as banning all Muslims. Okay, we can play pretend and just ignore reality and facts for a while. We can do that. So if Trump's temporary travel restriction from 7 countries is actually a ban on all Muslims, why is that bad for America?
It's bad for America for the exact reason that I just told you, is that, so I mean, firstly, like, there are people who are living in America for whom this travel restriction applies to and has been negative. There were stories of people like traveling out of the state, like into Canada for the weekend, and then being hit by the travel ban and not being able to come back. You might not want to consider those people American, but I think that under the stage that if they here temporarily on a green card or some other sort of thing, that, you know, perfectly peaceful civilians who have nothing to do with any of this kind of radical ideology, that may even be atheist or have, you know, no beliefs that are even slightly compatible with Islam, being hit by this is something that is a negative. But it's also bad for the specific reason that I told you, is that it's ineffective in stopping any kind of terror because of the reasons I supplied, that very few people from these actual countries commit any sort of attacks, and the ones that commit the most attacks and have the most extreme anti-American ideology are specifically countries that are left off the travel ban, but also because it furthers the narrative of radicalization and allows radical groups like ISIS to more easily recruit people to their cause by saying that the US has a war on Islam. And I think that that's hugely problematic. If we actually want to talk about ending the war on terror and about, you know, stopping these problems, then we should be able to, then we should take steps actively to de-radicalize people and to shrink the support of ISIS, not actively give them more members. I think that seems like a pretty intuitive argument for me. But I feel like we're going to keep talking about this Muslim ban for ages if we don't sort of change the topic, and we've only got a little bit left. So there's a couple of other things that I want to get your thoughts on, right? So a couple of other issues that Trump is really bad for the American people are privacy and security. So director of the CIA, Mike Pompeo, is an individual that says that Edward Snowden should be executed for the leaking of the information that he did, and also that he wants to increase the NSA spying, right? So this is a director of the CIA who is completely fine with the massive civil liberty breachment that was the NSA spying and the further monitoring of America's own people by its government. I think that, you know, those kind of like assaults on privacy and assaults on civil liberties are something that can be classified as kind of being pretty bad for America. And similarly, under this issue of security, Trump, in a recent meeting with a bunch of sheriffs, encouraged them to use asset forfeiture, which is a policy whereby the police are able to seize people's assets and use them for their own benefit without even having to go through due process or any of these other sort of things, which also has been used many times to infringe on people's civil liberties. So I wonder if I can get your thoughts on that, about whether or not you think that these things constitute as being bad for the American people.
Well, you have this interesting game you're playing where the debate is supposed to be about Trump's policies, and instead of that, you point to individuals and their own private beliefs that are part of his administration as as evidence of his policies. I noticed that you ignored all the actual policies that he's done, which are going to, well, already he's creating tens of thousands of jobs, just what he's doing with the pipelines. The fact that he is already making better foreign relations with other countries than the last president ever did or could ever dream of doing. I know you want to get off the whole Muslim topic because you know that you're weak in that area, but I have 12 and a half minutes left, so I'm going to talk a little bit more about it. First of all, you pointed out Indonesia as saying this is some great country. It has the highest rate of human trafficking in the whole world, Indonesia. It's related to the deforestation and what families there have to resort to in order to make money, which is a different topic altogether. Secondly, you pointed out that banning people from these countries is somehow recruiting terrorism, which seems like a very odd response unless there's some ideology in that person's head that makes them likely to do that kind of thing. So my question to you is, if the country of Iran decided to ban white males from Australia with beards, would you go and join a radical terror group in protest?
So the thing you need to understand about me is that I have a fairly stable life. I have things that are keeping me sort of chugging along nicely in terms of like family and career and education and all sort of things like that. That I think kind of disqualify me from this argument about like, you know, Iran bans me, therefore that I'm going to go ahead and join a radical group. If it was the case that Iran was to ban me from entering their country, that their people were to, that their, say, Grand Ayatollah was to speak publicly about how Australia is a threat to the world and that we need to wipe people out specifically because that they're Australian and that their ideology is fundamentally toxic and dangerous. If Iran was to, for example, bomb, you know, places where I live and kill people that I knew and target not only myself but also my friends and family specifically because I, you know, was an Australian, and then after all of those things came along, that that someone was to come along with me and say, hey, we're gonna, you know, form an insurgency group. We might try to take down Iran because we think that what they're doing is a little bit unjust. Maybe at that point, actually, yeah, you know, I would be kind of convinced to say, hey, these guys are kind of bastards. I think I'm going to sort of take them down, right? I think that like you're claiming that like, oh, this is such a weird thing that's going on, right? Where first we bomb them, we kill all of their families and we kill their people they care about. And then we say that their ideology is toxic and dangerous to us. And then we stop them from coming into our country. And then all of a sudden they hate us. That's weird. That's such a non-like sequitur. That's a leap of logic that doesn't understand. But it's so abundantly clear the way that works, right? Is that these people are being radicalized because they are convinced by people that America is against them. And they have a fair case because in all of the policy that is being shown, that is more or less the case.
It's interesting how this group of people over the last 1,400 years could kill 270 million innocent people under the banner of their political death cult disguised as a religion, which of course the left calls the religion of peace, hilariously. So 270 million innocent people killed. Do you think maybe that could make people suspicious of your motives?
I would say that once again, like tying that specifically to the religion and to Islam is ignoring the multitudinous number of other geopolitical motivating factors, which may cause people to, you know, commit violent actions, right? And specifically targeting, you know, this group as the group that causes more deaths than anyone else is to ignore the history that we've seen of all around the world, basically every state in existence.
No, you're completely wrong. I mean, Hitler and Stalin and Pol Pot and Mao Zedong put together have killed a fraction of the number of people that Muslims have. I don't know why you're being an apologist for them. You keep talking about, oh, geopolitical factors and cultural factors. You don't understand that their religion is the geopolitical factor. It is the cultural factor. It gives a very specific layout for how things are going to be run, what type of government you should have, what type of culture you should have. There's no separating the religion of Islam from the way government is practiced in Muslim countries. So for you to say, you know, forget the 270 million innocent people, the only reason they're radical is because America bombed them, is completely ridiculous. So far, here's what you've done in this debate. You talked about two individuals in the Trump administration barely touching on any of his policies, completely misrepresented his temporary travel restriction, which after 90 days, and by the way, they're going to put new vetting in, is going to be lifted. So I wonder if all the global terrorism is going to end then. You ignored that everywhere Muslims go, the rate of rape shoots through the roof and that Americans need to be protected from that. And of course, you completely ignored all the good things Trump has been doing. Regarding your topic with the police, as far as I'm concerned, things are so bad. Whatever police need to do, let them do it. Things have gone completely out of control. You know, violent crime peaked in the 90s, has been going down, 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 and now it's starting to pick up again because of all the anti-cop rhetoric that Obama and his mentally retarded thugs that he surrounded himself with in the Justice Department put into place. So you've completely failed to prove anything about Trump's policies. All you've proved is that some of the things he's saying might make Muslims angry. That has nothing to do with what's best for America. Thanks for trying, and maybe we will debate again.